Today we are going to talk about unlawful assemblies, how police uses force to disperse them, and what are the underlying legal provisions. Of late, a number of our young friends from the legal fraternity, as well as from those taking the civil services examinations, as well as young IAS and PCS officers, have been requesting me to dissect these few sections of the Code of Criminal Procedure and the Indian Penal Code. So what I intend to actually do is to go in for two short, brief videos. In the first one, we shall be talking in terms of what an unlawful assembly is, and in the second one, as to who can direct this unlawful assembly to disperse and what type of force can be used to do so. First of all, we have to go to Section 141 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines an unlawful assembly. An unlawful assembly has been clearly defined there. It must be comprising 5 or more persons. So therefore, persons up to 4 cannot constitute an unlawful assembly. And the definition is quite clear. I can read you a few clauses, but go through the bare section of 141 IPC and you'll find that it comprises 5 or more persons who, with a common object, so what do they intend to do? To overawe by criminal force the central government or state government or any public servant in exercise of lawful power of such public servant, or to resist the execution of any law or legal process. We'll try to slide in a small slide to this effect, but otherwise you see that this assembly comprising 5 or more persons must have a common objective which should fall within these 5 or 6 enumerated points. If it doesn't, it does not constitute an unlawful assembly. By way of a clarification, the law states that this assembly, to begin with, can be a lawful assembly, but during the developing situation, it can then become an unlawful assembly. Now, before we get into the use of force, which would be the subject of the next video, it needs to be understood that being the member of an unlawful assembly per se, under section 143 of the IPC, is itself an offence. It may not be a very heinous offence, but each and every person comprising an unlawful assembly becomes liable to imprisonment which may go up to 6 months. So therefore, being a member of the unlawful assembly itself makes you liable for a criminal offence. You may not have done any covert act as long as the common objective falls within the definition of 141. So therefore, be very careful that any person who becomes a member of the unlawful assembly has committed a criminal offence by the very purpose, by the very reason of their having a common objective. So therefore, that is there. And then another thing which is usually quoted in the law books as an example of vicarious liability, 149 IPC. They say once an unlawful assembly which has this common objective, it commits in pursuance of this common objective some offense. It can be rioting, it can be arson, it can even be going to kill lives, murder and so on. So then all the members of the unlawful assembly become equally liable as per law. So here the law is not really apportioning the blame. You are a member of the unlawful assembly, nothing has happened, no further offense you have committed, but this itself is a substantive offense. Up to 6 months you can be punished. But on the other hand, if this unlawful assembly goes ahead and commits further offenses, then each and every member of that unlawful assembly becomes liable to be punished for the same. So therefore, friends, before we merge into the next session and the video, let us just underscore and underline that an unlawful assembly must comprise 5 or more persons. They have a common objective which stands enumerated in 141 IPC. Being the member itself of an unlawful assembly is an offence, punishable up to 6 years, 6 months in imprisonment, and should they commit further offence, any member of that assembly, rioting, arson, whatever, then each and every member becomes liable for that offence. Now, in the next video, which I strongly recommend you watch sequentially, we'll be seeing how the police or the executive magistracy can use force to disperse this unlawful assembly. Stay tuned.